We have the new language at the top of the agenda as well. Just make sure that you're working off of that in case you had notes.
That's what I got.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, we are live.
All right, welcome, good afternoon, and welcome to the July 2022 meeting of the White Cliffs Committee. Pursuant to S2985 as amended, a bill to extend certain COVID-related amendments to the open meeting law as modified by Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022, permitting remote meetings and participation until March 31, 2023, signed into law on July 16, 2022. This meeting will be conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance by members of the public will be permitted. This meeting will be live streamed, but will not include public participation. All right, with that, welcome. Any lead off before we get right into the agenda, John?
No, just want to check and make sure everybody's connectivity is good, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Does that mean speak?
Do it by a roll call vote of everybody on, making sure that they can be heard.
All right, Julianne,
I'm here.
Tom,
Here.
Diana. You're on mute.
Here.
It was a test. Norm,
I'm here.
Scott,
Present.
Lori,
Here.
and Brett.
Yes, I'm here.
I think we passed the test.
I'm present also, Mr. Chairman.
We already heard you, so I think we knew. All right. Now we're ready for the agenda.
Yes, sir.
Anybody got any questions about the minutes from May 26th?
It's noted that I was in attendance and I was not.
You were missed, though.
Well, thank you. I did watch a lot of the 2-hour meeting, so it was great to catch up that way.
All right. Other than that, does anybody have any other issues?
Look good by me.
Get a motion?
We'll make a motion to accept the meeting minutes of May 26, 2022,
As amended.
as amended.
And a second?
Second?
All right. Any discussion? No. Let's do the roll call vote. Start with Norm,
Yay.
Diana.
Abstain.
Oh, that's right. Tom,
Yay.
Julianne,
Aye.
and I vote yay as well. Minutes are approved. So then we'll move on to the main event.
I do have one question. Sorry, Todd, to interrupt. But I noticed we've never had the meeting minutes from our December 18th meeting, 2020. That was the last meeting we met with DBBW. And I assume at some point we'll see the June 23rd, 2022 meeting minutes. So those are just.
Yeah, staff is working on the backlog of minutes.
Okay, that's all I want to know. Thank you.
Curious, how important are the meeting minutes if the stuff is live streamed on YouTube and you can go back and watch it?
I've been trying to argue that with the state. Do you know how much time and resources we spend making minutes for meetings that are video recorded and archived? So,
Okay, well, just occurred to me now.
yeah.
All right. Brett, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
John, did you want to lead this discussion?
Yeah, just by way of setting the table, as you all know, at our last meeting, we did approve awarding of the contract to Brett Pelletier of Kirk and Company. He's been tasked with helping the committee draft a RFP of some sort, a request for proposals, and to then market and help us analyze the results that come back. Essentially, what we're trying to do is to solicit potential private sector folks who may be interested in partnering with us on rehabilitating the White Cliffs facility and getting it back into use. As you know, we went through the long evaluation with the architectural firm DBVW. They had done a full analysis, assessment of the building and an initial reuse study. Came down to several potential reuses. We sort of have focused on event space as probably the most viable reuse, but felt like we really can't just proceed without trying to essentially find a partner to help us move the project forward. So what Brett is being brought in for. And then so today, what we're really going to be talking about is I understand Brett's got some discussion questions and points and maybe a little bit of homework for us to determine what the priorities are of the town. The idea is to have a request for proposals that would sufficiently frame up what it is the town is hoping to get out of this process, so that potential bidders or proposers would know what we're seeking, and would allow us to better focus and market our intentions out into the private sector. So I hope that sufficiently sets the table. And with that, I would turn it over to Brett.
Great. Thanks so much. And thank you for the opportunity to serve the community again. I'm really looking forward to the next few months and beyond. What I'm going to we're going to go through some quick and dirty bullet points here, not to try to overwhelm you. Let's sort of bite-sized chunks at a go here. When I look at this process from a fundamental sort of architectural framework, what I see is that you folks need to be at a place at some point in the future where you have chosen, after an evaluation process, a partner for this project. And so ultimately, we're looking through this entire process with an eye towards what that means. And actually, that's really, really important, because what it does is it frames the discussion, and it frames the fundamental primary work we're going to be doing in a way that gets us closer to where we want to be. And I think that's generally the challenge in these exercises, is to say, okay, we need to get on paper so that we can evaluate these criteria, these set of parameters, these set of acceptable and unacceptable benchmarks, so that we can evaluate the proposals. But more important than that, and more fundamental than that, is communicate to the community what exactly makes a good proposal, what makes a good response. Sometimes these things fall apart when it is unclear from the RFP what exactly the benchmarks to success are, the cornerstones of what you all envision and are trying to accomplish here. And so we're going to talk about a little bit more, and John indicated that I've got some homework for you. We're going to get there, but basically priming you with the understanding that we're really trying to do a few things. First, we're trying to share an opportunity with a community that is looking for these sorts of opportunities. We're sharing information, all of the information that we have, all of the due diligence that we've done over the years, all of the reports, all of the money you've spent on engineering and architectural and preservation work, and also the resources that potentially you have. That's a conversation we're going to get to a little bit later, but it informs where we're starting. And how we communicate in our RFP what a successful response or a successful proposal is, really is kind of what we're trying to achieve, first. And so if we don't know what a good proposal is, how the heck can the development or the user community know what a good proposal looks like? So what I'd like to do is sort of ask for a few things. What I'm going to do is set up a data war room, and I'll reach out to John later today or tomorrow with a link to it. It's just a simple encrypted Dropbox account that you all can dump information into or send it to John. I've got what's on the website, but I want absolutely everything that has ever touched White Cliffs in any shape or form. And I will curate that data set so that when we do go to bid and we have interested parties, those folks will be given access to all of the information that we have that is relevant and will help them understand the site better, understand the physical asset better, understand the thinking that has been done thus far, and hopefully glean some wisdom and guidance from that information as to what the community is going to eventually want. So if there are things that you have that you know of that are not publicly available on the website link, start digging into your files and folders and putting that information together, because that is really valuable information. The second is I have already started a database where I am tracking, or will be tracking, interested parties, individuals, companies, organizations, whomever, that may be a good resource for our due diligence exercise in advance of issuing the RFP. And that could be people who have contacted the town previously and said, hey, that's a cool old building. What are you doing with it? I'm interested, maybe interested. I know sometimes those conversations happen offline, but if you have any of those resources that have been in communication with the town, or you members individually previously, I want to include them in our data scrub. Those can be all the way from primary users of end users of the space, but also they could just be adjacent and related individuals, preservation folks, contractors that work in the space. That it's all about kind of creating a big network of individuals and organizations that we can tap into to find sort of the sleeping folks who are not necessarily as easy to find. Gas station developers and contractors that build schools, they're easy to find, right? They're everywhere. But we need to work really hard to find the people that really recognize a unique opportunity like this. So those are the two data sources that I'm hoping to solicit from all of you. Does that make sense so far? I'm not saying anything that's crazy or out. Good. So those are really going to help me as I begin. I've already started to put together a call sheet and reach out to some people who are involved in this kind of work. So, but I think it would be helpful to create a robust list of those people so that they're, like I said, when I proposed my task list, I think of this as a lot of work in advance, way before you even put this thing out on the street. You're going to be poking people saying, hey, you're going to want to pay attention to what we're going to do. And I'm happy to share with you the publicly available information. You're going to get it if you decide to bid, but we want to prime these people as much as possible so that they're engaged. And if they say, hey, it's not for me, but you know what, I actually know somebody who might be interested in this. That's the idea.
Just a quick comment. Yeah. The building was on sale through a local realtor for almost 2 years before the town purchased it.
Yeah.
Is it appropriate to approach the realtor and ask for if he'd be willing to give us his checklist of all his contacts? Is that an appropriate thing to do?
I think that's fine. Will he give them to you? I think that's the other question.
That's true, but if we don't ask, we don't know. So.
Absolutely. I don't think it's an inappropriate ask. And he may just say, no, I'm sorry, those are proprietary contacts that, I reserve the rights to hold on to. And in the event that there's a transaction, he wants to protect his interests. I understand that. So.
Well, Norm, you can certainly provide the realtor with Brett's information so we can get into that database.
Oh, good point.
Minimum, right?
Yep, that's true.
Yeah, I vaguely remember meeting with him years and years ago, but if I couldn't remember his name, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's Mike Durkin. I think Mike has expressed a willingness to be helpful in this. He's a Northborough resident and he wants to see the building be successful if we can make it.
That's great. We'll make sure he gets on the list.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Can I just ask, if I may, Norm, you probably are the best resource for this, but I'm not sure what other documents would exist. I mean, we've pretty much put in the reuse process, and then anything that Norm has come across, we've dumped onto the website. It's pretty robust.
Okay.
I'm just trying to think of, at least on the staff side, if there's anything more that, we have, or we would, that isn't already been out there. We went through a pretty exhaustive process of getting as much information as we could.
What about the LSP reports from Capital Environmental, the clean DEP certificate of the hazardous oil removal?
Good point.
And even the mold reports that we just got from the interior? It doesn't all have to be good news.
Yeah. No, actually, it's I wouldn't call that bad news, but I would say that's better than a question mark for a user or a developer or a potential buyer. Is to say, I'd rather have a phase one that maybe has uncovered some unsavory bits here and there than have no idea what is going on.
It's all been remediated.
Even better.
Yeah, it's
so
all
of
been
that-
taken, it's all been
all of
taken
that
care of. So
stuff.
yeah, that is good information actually to have out
Absolutely.
there, that we did our due diligence prior to closing on the property,
Mhm.
and all that's been remediated. So
That's fantastic, because then somebody who's looking at this, their first question is, oh gosh, it's probably full of asbestos and lead-based paint.
oh, well, I'm sorry, I
underground oil
should be more
tanks, all
specific.
sorts of
It was
other-
the outside. There's
Okay.
asbestos and other stuff on the inside
Okay.
that's been identified as well.
Okay.
So
Well,
there is
even
still
still,
remediation that needs to be done.
understanding the scope of what that looks like is really a good step. Reducing in any real estate transaction or speculative investment exercise, reducing the uncertainty as much as you can is really, really very, very powerful tool for getting people comfortable with the situation that they're about to walk into. Even a dimly lit room is better than pitch black, right? Okay, so the tick, 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 tick. The main work, and I'm just about done with my bit of the time here. The main work that we need to start doing is putting together, getting a place where we can start to make some decisions on those scoring metrics, right? Because the easiest way to evaluate an RFP is to have a really simple and a really effective scoring metric that it communicates both to the community and also the developers or the operators or the users what the criteria is. And it makes your job easier because you can be relatively analytical about this, and you don't have to go, well, we really liked this and about that, and we really didn't like this about that. You have no way of scoring it. So what I would really like to do is give you all a bit of homework, which is to say that start thinking about what criteria would fit into that scoring metric. What is advantageous or not advantageous about a particular proposal? And that could be, I'm going to break it out into two different things, the scoring metrics, but also let's think about sort of a framework of the fundamental RFP. Are we talking about something that is acceptable or unacceptable? Is a outright sale acceptable to you or unacceptable? Is a ground lease acceptable or unacceptable? Is a joint venture? Let's start to, that'll help us answer what kind of proposal this is. Is this an outright sale? Is this a true partnership with the town? Is this a lease, a ground lease that the town maintains ownership of the asset, but is leasing effectively for an long-term period? Those are the fundamental things. How do we want to present this? How do you want to present this in a way that reflects the sort of public policy prerogatives and opportunities that you see? We don't want to send out a proposal that's too broad that we get a ground lease proposal and we say, no, we're not interested in a ground lease, or we're not interested in selling it outright, or we want to maintain ownership, or if there are particular public policy things that you want to make your opinion known about, we want to talk about those. And that goes for the community as well as John, you as well. Is there something on the municipal side of the equation that is just not an acceptable deal point, or that is highly would really make a difference? And John, this is, I think, tailored a little bit more to you. Those resources, what are those potential resources? We want to be in a position to come to to respond to questions about, are there sources of funding? Is there a CPA allocation? Is there a grant somewhere that the town has access to, or that they've carved out a tax financing agreement previously and would be willing to willing to consider those sorts of things, or not at all? We want to make sure we're explicit about those things. So the criteria really are, and I want to, as you're thinking about this, limit it to about 5. So these are going to be, in addition to those acceptable and unacceptable terms, this is your wish list. This is what would make you, on each of these bullet points, on a scale of, let's call it 1 to 10, 1 being that is going to get you, that is not a very good submission, to 10, which is you nailed it, you hit the nail on the head, right? 5 areas that would serve as this criteria for a successful bid. It could be any.
Mr. Chairman, are you, Diane has her hand up. I'm not sure if you want to.
Thanks. I was just wondering, as you're talking about the sort of scoring and the criteria that we're going to establish, are you able to share some similar RFPs that you know of or have seen, and realizing that White Cliffs has its own unique set of circumstances? It's not going to be fully informative, but I think that it just to understand how the language is put together, I think will help us as we discuss things and look at how we want to present the criteria.
I can do that. And I would say that don't worry too much about the granular language. These are fundamentally the wishes of the community. They may ultimately, when we get to consolidating and synthesizing, they may not be helpful individually, but we want to get to a place where we have a set of criteria that works. And I will put together a handful of examples and send them over ASAP. These could be wish list items. We would love for this to be, X. We would love a developer or user to create, incorporate blank, create blank, arts and cultural use, or some amount of public access, or this is an exercise that sort of, we want to, it's messy. It's going to be clunky. It's going to be messy. We're going to pile it all together and we'll see what that looks like. And it may be the first time you have all written down in, pen and ink, actually what your priorities are for this property, because that'll help us to refine where our conversation goes from there. Does that make sense?
We can actually use pen and ink?
I do it all the time. You can't see, but I've got piles of papers around my office.
I have a question. Do you want us to come up with so we each individually come up with our wish list, and then do we meet as a committee and kind of consolidate it and then bring it to you, or do you want 5 different opinions?
I want 5 different opinions about your top 5 kind of criteria for success. What would be the components of a successful proposal?
Okay. All right.
Someone else had their hand up.
I
Lori?
did, but I actually have the same question as Julianne. I was wondering if you wanted a consensus of the group or whether you wanted individual responses.
Individual responses would be ideal. Yep. And if I don't know what if you're meeting on a monthly basis, but that would be an acceptable time frame for getting that exercise done.
Brett, are you referring to a comparative evaluation criteria in the RFP? So make metrics to compare all respondents along a
Correct.
level playing field.
Yeah, ultimately that's what we're trying to get to. But before we can even get to that, we need to understand what it is we actually want. And that can be a challenge because we are often in a position. I've been in this position a number of times with these RFP, with these projects. We don't really have, maybe I don't have strong opinions on what I want this to be. I want the development and the user community to tell me what they think they can do here. But we do have to do that sort of, it's a little bit of banging your head against the table a bit to figure out exactly what we think is acceptable and what is beneficial and what is the opposite of those things. Just so we don't get to a place where we get a bunch of responses and we say, these didn't meet any of our expectations. We want to be able to put those expectations. We do that thinking now so that we don't end up in a position where we're not able to communicate that effectively. Great. Okay. That's the that's my list of things that I think will be basically the primary drivers of the first stage of due diligence.
Should we establish a deadline by which the homework assignment shall be handed in?
That's fine.
Like 2 weeks?
2 weeks is, if that's not too much pressure in the middle of the summer for you folks, I think that would be perfect.
We got a lot bigger problems if that's too much pressure in them. 2 weeks from today. And they'll email you directly?
Yeah, that's a good question. How do we, what's the most efficient and effective way and the thing that keeps everybody happy? You can certainly email me directly, or we can funnel things through.
That's my preference. I can't think of any municipal restraints on doing it that way, but I'm sure someone will jump in and correct me if I'm wrong.
And that's fine. I'm a big fan of having custody of everything when I'm working on a project. So if I can organize it and sort it, I'm happy to have that direct information.
Okay.
Great. The other thing where if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I have two final sort of closing comments that I wanted to share. I tell this or say this to every municipal client I have or nonprofit client I have, and it is at points in this process, you individually or you as a group are going to be uncomfortable with the task, with the process, with the responses, and I think that's understandable and it's a good feeling. You should get comfortable with being a little uncomfortable. This is a process that is not pro forma. This is a property that is not average. This is a task that is going to require extraordinary effort and time and energy from all of you and from the community and the town. It is understandable. Don't take that as anything other than we're going to get through it and understand that we have a plan and we have a process, and at any point you are in control, right? You are never out of control. So be comfortable being a little uncomfortable. And also the last is to tell this to every one of my municipal clients. You may find you need to alter your expectations slightly. No one knows as much about this asset as you all do. No one is as connected to this process in this community as you all are. No one is as close to this as you all are. That is not true of almost anyone else in the world. And so, just like this process is not throwing a flag out and saying, come and get it, it's about reaching out and really doing that hands-on individual outreach and communication to people, that is the same as in the same process we are going to use throughout the entire process. And I hear it a lot. And I sat on a municipal board for 8 years, and I was part of the process when it happened. People would say, "Oh, well, why didn't so-and-so just look on the website? That's where all the information is." It's second nature to all of you. It may not even have, it may not be a world that folks that are participating in this exercise have any experience with. And so that just may come as a, you might as well have said, go to the moon and find the information. So it is sometimes feels a little bit like we're hand holding, but if, at the end of the day, we have to hold someone's hand to get them to the finish line. It's time and energy well spent. So that's my little spiel on those two things. And I'm happy to answer any questions and stick around for anything you might need me to stick around for.
Yeah, to Brett, it'd be helpful if you stick around for at least the discussion regarding the preservation restriction process, just so we have some sense of how it relates to the work that you're going to do for us.
That's fine.
Any other questions for Brett on his presentation before we move on?
I'll do the raise hand thing. This is new to me. Brett, when you had mentioned earlier the data war room, is that something that will be set up soon? And is that another way we could forward these, submit our input to you? I don't mind sending you emails. I just want to know what's.
Yeah, so I will put, I'll build a sort of internal Dropbox today or tomorrow. I'll send that to John, and John can, get everybody on who needs to be on, or send me the emails of people who need access to it. That'll be a place where you can all securely add information to, and I will sort through it. In the future, what we will do is we will have a separate sort of curated war room for bidders or interested parties that will send them the link, and they can download all of the building survey information, the architectural study, your environmental stuff, anything that you want on there. So we can just say, here you go. That can include tax cards and site plans and anything that we've got to give them, a one-stop shop that they have information. There's nothing worse than going into a transaction and say, oh gosh, and now I need this, and then we got to go find it. And now I need this, and we got to go find it. We have it all in advance. We want to get it to them. The less we have to actually interact with back and forth sending documents, the better.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anything further on that?
Just in terms of timeline, Brett. So I think it would be helpful. I know you'd mentioned we're talking about like meeting again in a month or whatever we decide. It would be helpful, I think, if we had sort of a critical path timeline, so that we have some sense of what we'll be accomplishing and what the milestones would be. So we have some sense of if we're on track or not. So critical path timeline is always helpful. And because I think one of the things that we're going to be looking at is we're hopeful to get, this process moving forward and in time, so that if we do require town meeting action on anything, it could be additional funding, it could be approval, it could be a change of zoning, or all of the above. Our town meeting is in April of 2023. The warrant is closed typically by March, and we generally have a draft of the warrant going, in January, February. So, and obviously the boards and committees, if it requires work of, say, the Community Preservation Committee or the Planning Board, they're going to want to kind of get going on that stuff earlier in the, towards the end of the calendar year, late fall, winter. So, those timelines sneak up on you very fast. So we don't want too much of it to stretch out. unnecessarily. So I just want, unless we put a critical path timeline down and then everybody has a chance to sort of chime in on pieces of it. You know, we don't want to miss a deadline just because it wasn't like on our horizon or on our, you know,
That's fine.
worth keeping in mind. So I think that'd be helpful.
That's fine.
All right. I think that's it. Moving on. Preservation restrictions. So I'll start. My recollection is that under the CPA, and we use CPA funds for this, the law requires that we have a preservation of restriction at some point on the property. That doesn't say when we have to have a preservation restriction on the property. And we have reviewed this concept in the past, may have been 2 years ago at this point. But, you know, until we know, this is my view at this point, until we know who is going to use this building and what they're going to use it for, I don't unnecessarily want to tie our hands or their hands with a very particular preservation restriction, which will be murder to try to revise if we do it. I think we thought we sort of had agreed on that concept before, but that is my piece. I will now open it up for discussion. Julianne.
Okay, so I have a question. Of all the possible preservation restrictions, what is the most, what would be the easiest one to do? That would still preserve the building, but make it easy for development. And back to your other point about CPA, that we have to have some kind of restriction. Why, this is something that we shouldn't really surprise a developer, that if a developer comes in and we say, oh, hey, we forgot to tell you. This is
Well, if we accidentally put something in the restriction says you can't change the windows at all, and the first thing that they want to do is change the windows, we might need to go back to the state legislature to have the thing revised to allow them to use it. And so that's what we're trying to avoid, is until we know who it is and what they're going to do and what their plan is, I don't want to foreclose avenues of things that we can use. And I'm less familiar with preservation restrictions than I am with like open space restrictions, but the same concept sort of applies to both.
You have a hand up, Mr. Chairman?
Oh, Norm.
Hi, all right. So this, Todd, absolutely I agree with everything you're saying. However, I feel it's something we don't know enough about. So my interest really right now is I'd like to understand how much this process costs. There are three significant costs associated with a preservation restriction. Is the cost of having a lawyer draw it up. I don't know if that's thousands of dollars or more. There's the cost associated with, I don't know if I use the right word here, but you really need to have, you have to hire someone who keeps an eye on it in perpetuity, and that could be significant dollars. I don't know if that's 10 grand or 100 grand. And then the other thing is when you put the preservation restriction on it, the value of the property can decrease significantly. And I don't have a feeling for that. So the only reason I was interested in having the preservation restriction topic today is to recognize how much we don't know. How do we figure out what we should know before we go into this kind of a contract? So I just feel I'd like to come up that learning curve pretty quick, because I also read somewhere it could take about a year to get it. So, you know, I'd rather be an informed person than an uninformed person a year from now. That's my 2 cents on it.
Tom?
Norm, are those state or federal restrictions you're discussing?
Now, these are the ones that are controlled. I don't know that answer. That's the whole point, right? I don't know that answer.
Well, because the Department of Treasury handles the historic preservation on the federal level, and those guidelines are much more extensive and onerous than any state level. So we need to
I
sort through.
believe So the preservation restriction has to be approved by the Mass Historic Commission. So I
Correct.
believe it's on the state level, not the federal.
There are two properties in town that have preservation restrictions on them. One's on Bartlett Street and one is the Unitarian Church. I think the Bartlett Street example might be something that's just to contact the people who put it in and find out what they paid. That was a private home. It's not like White Cliffs, but it starts, you know, like I said, just trying to understand how this process works. Who a potential holder is.
Yeah, if I can try, Lori, I'm not sure if this is something that you would feel comfortable putting together, or Brett, do you have, in your experience, you know, can you provide some information perhaps?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do some research, and I'm not sure, Brett might know more particularly about the time associated with getting a restriction approved.
So what it sounds like, there's two distinct legal restrictions. The one is a restriction that has to be approved by the Mass Historic Commission. The other is, and it sounds like what you're talking about, is a preservation easement, which the two are similar in their goal of protecting historic properties, but they are different in their legal structure. A preservation easement is a private legal arrangement. It's actually a transaction. You give an easement to a nonprofit, typically. Historic New England is the big one that accepts these. It's a charitable gift. It generally costs the person who gives it, or the organization who gives it, a certain amount of money. And I'm trying to remember, because I am on a preservation, the Preservation Board in Rhode Island, and we're revising our program to be more in concert with Historic New England, because Historic New England's, it's quite expensive. I want to say in the vicinity of $20,000 to $50,000, depending on the gift. And basically, it's to fund perpetual maintenance of that easement, so that you go in and inspect every year, and if you have to sue for specific performance, you have a fund that can fund that. It all depends. So here's the thing. It all depends. You can have a simple restriction that says you can't do any alterations to the exterior, period. Pretty simple. You can get as granular as protecting individual architectural features, interiors, wall partitions, windows, fenestration, masonry. You can get very, very, very specific. And that dictates how long it takes. You can do fairly basic preservation restrictions in a few months to 6 months, and very extensive ones take a lot longer than that.
Lori, the Stuart Saginaw at the Community Preservation Coalition, right? They're going to have all of this, right? They're going to know what needs to happen, how long it takes, and we're a member. So I just call them, and they'll have forms and whatever we need to do, and estimates and time. I think they've probably got everything baked and ready to go for the most part. Who holds it is going to depend on what we do with the building, right? And Brett is right. We're going to separate the holder of the restriction from the owner of the property. So if we own the property, somebody else is going to have to be found to hold the restriction, and they may want an endowment to enforce it. They may not. But if we sell the building and we retain the restriction, then that's another way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, it's going to come down to what happens on game day when we pick somebody and we're off and running.
There may also be tax implications that should be considered. Typically, if a private owner gives something of value away through a Todd, you were talking about conservation. If someone gives away their development rights, they have given something of value, and there is oftentimes a consideration tax benefit to that private owner who is gifted this thing. So, you tend not to want to do these things in advance of having a clear idea who the beneficiaries of these various things are. And I would say you're in a unique position where you already sort of are preserving this building in a way that this easement or this preservation restriction would do. You aren't doing anything that would adversely impact the architectural or cultural fabric. You're not going to tear the building down, which is the big one. You're not going to make alterations to the building that jeopardize its ability to be listed or to be considered for historic tax credits, et cetera, et cetera. And so while you have site control and asset control, you're effectively controlling the utility and the preservation of it.
This is the discussion I was hoping for. Thank you.
And just a friend of mine and someone I've done some work with extensively here in Rhode Island is the former director of easements for the National Trust. Did it for over a decade, and so is a great resource for friendly and I can connect you to her if that's helpful as we get closer to that process.
All right, any other questions on restrictions? Hearing none, seeing none. All right, building condition update.
Sean Thompson's going to give us an update on the electrical work and the dehumidification initiative.
So the electrical panel and outlets have been installed. They're going to be inspected by the town electrical inspector later on this afternoon. The areas of the building have been sectioned off. We have all the supplies. So once the electrical gets approved by the inspector, we'll be able to start the dehumidification process.
Tom, do you have Sean, do you have a timeline on that? When are I know we were waiting, there's a little bit of a backlog on getting the dehumidifiers.
Yeah, so the dehumidifier is supposed to be here this afternoon. So as long as those get delivered on time today, the electrical inspection goes good. Tomorrow, I'll bring everything over and fire it up and we'll be good to go. If there's any issues, I'll let you guys know, but I expect to have everything up and running by the end of the week.
Okay.
I have a question. I don't know how to raise my hand on the screen, sorry. Do you have a report on the mold? According to the minutes, you were gonna give us more information on that, I think?
Yeah, so we did get the report back from the LSP. As expected, there is mold present in the building, which we knew beforehand. Doing the dehumidification will help to bring down and kill the existing mold in the air. We may need to take additional measures after the fact. He suggested maybe doing some pilot cleaning in the sections that are cleared off to see how extensive it would be as far as remediating the woodwork and things like that.
Can you give us a little more of a picture? Like, is it in every room? Is it visible to the eye? Is it?
So they did a variety of different tests. So they did tape lifts, they did air samples. So it is present throughout the building at varying degrees in different areas. So like I said, his recommendation in the report was that we section off a small area of the building and do some test cleaning. And then once it's cleaned, have them come back through, do testing and see how well the cleaning worked in those specific areas. The carpet itself will need to go, which we already knew. And some of the other porous surfaces may need to be addressed. The main focus will be checking on the hard surfaces and seeing how, like, to what extent those are damaged, whether it's just surface cleaning or if it needs to be more involved.
So the plan is to section it off, figure out how to do it, and then go by section?
So the idea would be at this point is we've got the main building sectioned off for the dehumidification. Let the dehumidification work for a little bit, bring down the humidity in the building, then find a specific room, do some test cleaning on the hard surfaces and see how effective that is in reducing the mold on those surfaces.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I want to be very careful about what this building it's an open building. As you know, we've got additions that are compromised and were recommended by the architect to be removed. And they are actively leaking, so we've tried to section them off from the historic part of the building as much as we can. So the building is not climate controlled, nor will it be until there's some project that's done that renovates the entire place. So it's not going to be a climate controlled space, which means, we're going to be constantly chasing this. The best that we can do is keep the humidity levels down by running the dehumidifier, but we're not going to move into remediation because it's something that, again, until a larger project is done, in particular, the compromised additions are removed and somehow the building is sealed up. We're not going to be able to control the building won't be under climate control, which means you're just not going to be able to maintain that until we get some sort of a project moving. So we can't. I don't see us doing much in the way of cleaning. It's important to know kind of what the status of things are. The big issue is just try to mitigate the humidity that's in the historic part of the building as much as we can. But the reality is, you don't have air conditioning, you don't have heat. You're not going to be able to control that climate. You're going to continue to have issues. Plus, really, the biggest priority would be removal of the additions, which was recommended by the architect. But again, that's substantial cost to do that. So we did talk, just so for people's recollection, we talked with DBVW about running, dehumidifiers, trying to do something inside the building. And basically what they had told us at the time was between the additions that were leaking, the roof and the windows and all that, it was pointless. And so that's why we focused on getting the roof and the windows sealed and the building envelope sealed up as much as we can. And then they recommended removal of the additions. We did not have the funding to do that. So we sealed the additions that were problematic off. This is sort of the next step, is trying to seal off the dance hall area part off and just try to run dehumidification, at least for the summer months, to try to keep the just the humidity down to reduce the ambient mold that's going to be floating around in the air. I think that's the best we're going to do until we have a better sense of where we're going.
Norm?
I want to know if we can have, someone can send us those reports on the air quality. I would request that first. I'd like one for sure, if that's possible.
I'll take one. Also, if I can chime in here, am I hearing two different things? That Sean is saying that there will be some cleanup, and John, you're saying just.
Well, here's the thing. An LSP, any consultant is willing to do more and more work for you. I think as the owner, we need to decide. There's no, my concern is that there's no point in doing a surface cleaning if we're not going to be able to maintain the place that's being conditioned. So I think we need to have a further discussion with the LSP about what we're trying to get accomplished here.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I was unclear. I was just saying that was his recommended next step. Right. Whether or not we do it would really determine on what we're going to do with the building, because to John's point, if we're not going to continuously condition the space, then doing that, it's just going to revert back to its original thing. That would be a way to find out, like, say we have a potential buyer, like, this is what's going to be involved in the remediation process for them if we wanted to go that route. But it's not something that we necessarily have to do right away.
I don't want anybody to think. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Julianne. Go ahead.
We don't know the extent of the cleanup yet, right? The mold consultant hasn't said, you know, washing down with bleach is gonna be fine, or you have to take down all the wood and.
No,
We don't know that yet, correct?
the suggestion from the LSP was if we chose to do a deep cleaning to try to remove mold, was to do a sample cleaning site with different mechanisms to see if it would even work. First, to dehumidify the area, and then at that point, see the extent of mold propagation, primarily in the hard surfaces. We know soft surfaces more readily suffer from mold infestation. So primarily the hard surfaces. So let's get the humidity out of there, see what the hard surfaces look like, and that's about as much data as we need right now.
So Scott, we also have some painted ceilings that kind of fall halfway between the hard and soft. And they're quite elaborate, and they're also falling apart. So that I'm not so concerned about the hardwood or the tile and the marble. It's those ceilings. The carpet I don't care about, but the ceilings are critical.
We would expect the ceilings to be similar to the walls. The walls may be a little bit worse off because of the wallpaper, the silk wallpaper. We'd have to reach out to the LSP and see if they did any tape lifts on the plaster portions of the walls, like as you go up the stairs. Those are not wallpapered walls, to see if they did specific tape lifts. I would guess that they would do them on the different types of surfaces, but we'd have to review the report.
I guess my point here, guys, is that, you know, we're trying to preserve the building envelope. We're trying to do what we can to maintain the humidity levels inside. The end game here is getting through this process in a project to permanently restore and preserve the building. That's where we need to get to. You know, the building is no surprise when we got it, when we took it over, and we had DBVW, our architect, go through it. You know, the roofs were leaking, the skylight was leaking. There was a lot of water infiltration. We've done a good job in terms of trying to seal up that building envelope. But again, humid weather in the summertime, you know, if you don't have conditioned air inside, things are going to get musty and moldy, and that's just the nature of it. So, but I just want to, you know, again, we're not moving forward with a, you know, remediation of the building. We're trying to keep things as stabilized as we can and preserved as we can, so we can move through this process with Kirk and Company, get someone to come in and do a project. Ultimately, that's the end game. Otherwise, it's a slippery slope with everything on that building. You touch one window or windowsill, then you're into a big project, as opposed to like we're just encapsulating and sealing things up for the time being. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, obviously, on that building. So,
and if you get to a certain point, because you're on that slippery slope, you're going to tip into, you know, impacting a certain value of construction relative to the value of the building, where you're forced to upgrade everything, and we can't do that. So I agree with your approach.
We're just trying to stabilize and preserve and get through this process so we can get a project with an end game here. So we're not going to remediate, you know, the inside of the building with mold. It's pointless, because we can't. Again, the building has additions that need to come off. There's no, you know, air conditioning. There's no heating. Until those things are all in place, it's going to be very difficult to you know, again, maintain the place. So, but we do everything we can in the meantime.
Norm.
If we're all done with this discussion on mold, at the last meeting, it was mentioned that the chimney would be disassembled, and I'd like to just formalize that in this meeting, that the work was done, because it was not, last meeting it was not completed. It was going to be completed. So if it just could formalize the status of the chimney.
Yeah, that'd be Sean.
Yeah, so the chimneys come down. The bricks, they were able to save, I'd say, about 80% of them during the demo process, the original bricks. They're palleted in the parking lot right now. The terracotta cap had to come off in pieces because it was put together up there in pieces. So there was really no safe way to take it off without risking it falling apart midair or coming apart while they were taking it off. So those pieces are stacked together on a pallet inside the foyer of the building.
Great, progress. Thank you.
And Sean, just so everybody's clear, so we're pretty confident now, the way that's sealed up, that nothing else is going to come down and no water's getting in.
Yeah,
from-
so
on
so
the
they
inside.
brought it right down to the roof line, and then they capped it. So we've had a handful, not very many though this year, but rain events since it came down. Some pretty windy too, and after or during and after any rain event, I'll go into the building and just double check. I put some paper towels at the bottom of the fire pit as well, just so we could see if any driving rain got in. And there doesn't seem to be any moisture getting into the building, which is nice.
Thanks, Sean.
It?
Yes,
On
sir.
that topic, all right. The next item, report by members regarding recent visits to other historic event spaces. It's not me, so that must be somebody else. I don't go anywhere.
You can join us next time. So we had, myself and Julianne and Laurie have visited a few places recently. And I'll start with one of them that we visited just about a month ago. So we went to the Asa Waters Mansion, which is in Millbury, which Laurie is very familiar with. And we want to look at that. The reason I'm going on these trips is to try to understand how these businesses operate, how they get funding to upgrade the facility, and how they run their business today. So Asa Water was interesting because it's completely town-owned. The director of Asa Waters is an employee of the town. And in speaking with her, like everything else, it's a town-owned function. So if she needs upgrades in the building or repairs to the building, it all has to go through town meeting and the like, which is something we would recognize if we stayed with ownership. They're starting to make a profit with their facility. It's taken several years. She's upgrading her catering kitchen. It's a very small space for her kitchen. The venue is quite small on the inside. I think it's maybe 80 people they could put in that one room. So it's not a big event space at all. The interesting thing is they did on the exterior, they put up a large tent for COVID so they could have larger events on the property outside in their tent structure, and they actually bought the tent structure. So everything was, it's just kind of interesting how, in my mind, how it works with the town and how, everything has to go through town meeting for upgrades and purchases and the like. The one thing that she brought up that surprised the heck out of me is that because she said because she's on the National Register, she got special permission to put this tent on the property. They wanted to take it down now because it's on the National Register and it's not part of the historic fabric of the building. She's been able to stall them for a couple of years. Sometimes I don't understand the National Register requirements because sometimes they just don't seem to make sense. And it's something we should know when we try to go to put our properties on the National Register. What are these little quirks we don't know about? Is it something that the Mass Historic Commission just drives home? Or, I mean, in my simple mind is a practical way is to keep the tent up, keep her income up, and keep the building properly fixed. But anyway, that was my big surprise with that property. But it looks good. I'm optimistic.
Are you having an air raid?
What is,
I'm sorry, my computer, I don't know why it does that, but it sounds like it's backing up something that's a lot of noise. When I mute it, it should go away. So I'm done now. Laurie, I know you had something to talk about.
All right, so another property that we visited was the Lyman Estate. So this is a property owned by Historic New England. I have also been to another one of their facilities, which is located in Milton. The Lyman Estate is located in Waltham. The Eustis Estate in Milton is a very similar architectural character as the White Cliffs Mansion. It looked very similar. So I was particularly interested in hearing from them how they select properties to purchase. So they own 38 historic buildings throughout New England. Their recent acquisitions are often accompanied by multi-million-dollar endowments, which then are pooled, and they are utilized, spread out amongst their properties to pay for maintenance and rehab costs. The buildings that they select have a story. They often have items that are associated with the building, like furniture or paintings and the like. And then they backfill the items that they showcase with estate sales and the like. They hold preservation restrictions on 119 properties. So they may be a good resource for us, for the White Cliffs, ultimately having the them hold the preservation easement for the White Cliffs property. We did have a lengthy discussion about various grant resources, and one of the grant resources, which actually I'm very familiar with, is Green Communities grants. So they have been able to access that funding for lighting, insulation, programmable thermostats, storm windows, and boiler furnace upgrades. They also mentioned that they've gotten grants through the Mass Cultural Council and the Mass Preservation Projects Fund. This specifically mentioned the value of historic tax credits if we have a private partner, which of course we already knew about. For the spaces that they own, they generally like to use them as event hospitality spaces. The Lyman Mansion has some office spaces. They do a museum tours once a month. They do weddings, corporate rentals, and they do special programming for the town, which includes movie nights. Those are held outside. Some interesting things that she mentioned that I jotted down is for historic buildings, you want to make sure you use dry sprinklers. So that is important to the ultimate preservation of the interior. And as far as landscaping is concerned, of course, you want to make sure it's picture friendly and representative of the period that you're trying to showcase within the interior of the house. So she suggested looking to historic photos for historically accurate cues, which of course we have an abundance of those, so that's great. So it was just really interesting to pick her brain. She did really spend a good deal of time with us, and certainly gave us the ability to follow up with her with other questions. So it was a very valuable visit, I believe.
I have a question that you might have covered in your discussion with her, or you might be able to follow up on. What is their approach to sustainable buildings and energy management? And I mean, these are all historic properties, so it's challenging, but just, you know, did they shed any light on their approach to that?
Yeah, I mean, mostly when we were talking about the green communities efforts. So what they try to do is, of course, make sure that the buildings are historically accurate, but also efficient. So I know also with my experience with the Asa Waters Mansion, we did a couple of green communities projects over there. And so we did a very, very extensive insulation project. So that was, of course, in order to keep the heating costs down, which were pretty astronomical. So in that circumstance, we had to use a particular type of blown-in insulation because we couldn't damage the walls. So what they did is they actually removed the boards from the exterior of the building, select boards, shot the insulation through, and then nailed the boards back. And we also had an issue with a historic window. So of course, you're not allowed to replace the windows. So what we did in this case, where we were having a lot of trouble with air escaping, is we put a storm window. So it was a brand new double paned window on the interior of the historic window. So from the outside, you couldn't see it at all. But it ended up plugging up a tremendous loss of heat that we were experiencing. So that's what she was suggesting with the programmable thermostats. They switched out all of their lights to LED lights, so they're able to save money there. And another interesting thing that I noticed is instead of having asphalt driveways, they had gravel driveways, which of course is a huge cost savings, but it is a bit of a maintenance headache. She said that they have to grade their driveways a couple of times a year. But it was a decision that they made because they were trying to target a particular historic period of time. And of course, asphalt driveways didn't exist at that time.
Thanks.
Just as a heads up, the couple of other places we want to visit is the Highfields facility in Falmouth. That's run by a nonprofit. It's been they have a lot of acreage, but we want to again, we want to understand how a nonprofit runs an organization like that. So that's a trip to Falmouth down the road. And in Weston, there's a Josiah Smith Tavern that's being reconfigured with a brand new addition for a new kitchen and hopefully a farm-to-table restaurant. And on the website, it looks at somehow they're linking in with a college to do the cooking. It's almost as a cooking school. So I think that's a short visit to Weston and understand what they're doing there. In my mind, this is just shaking the trees, seeing what other people have done, talking to them. Maybe they give us some insight on how we need to think about things in the future. So I think that's what we had for that part of the agenda.
Sorry about that. Thank you. I guess the thing we need to talk about now is the next date and what we're going to talk about at that date.
If I hate to do this to you, Todd, but there's a couple other short topics I'd like to bring up.
As long as we're done by 3:30, I'm going to be respectful of people's time.
Very good. Some of these are short answers. So John, for the feasibility study for Town Hall, is White Cliff still part of that discussion?
It is.
Okay.
It not as, again, I think it was intended to be a bigger piece of that, Norm, until we got the numbers from DBVW and Brett Pelletier's group. I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 33 million, which so we'll take a look at it, but it should be looked at as a potential site, but those numbers are a bit discouraging.
And another one, John, you explained to me when I visited Town Hall, but zoning. We know that the zoning currently now is 2 different zones. And how do we have to, when would we have to start to address zoning for the property? Because it's unlikely that it will be a single family home in the future.
Yeah, I spoke with Lori Connors about that, and I'm assuming that we'll have a conversation about that with Brett. But if that zoning needs to change, that would take place at town meeting, next town meeting.
Yes, and I have also laid the groundwork with the planning board. So they are absolutely open. It's on our to-do list for the next town meeting. So Brett, just so you're aware, the building itself is within the residential C district, which doesn't allow any sort of business uses, but it does allow certain like municipal institutional uses. So the front part of the property is within the business east district. So the thought is to just rezone the entire property business east, because it'll provide a lot more flexibility in the ultimate end use of the property. So you and I can talk a little bit more about that offline if you'd like.
Thank you. My next topic is today, we've already mentioned a couple of things about, something that could be short order helps in the building, like removing the carpets, maybe demolishing some of those compromised sections. We clearly don't have a budget for any of that. Now, so what are we doing now to get ourselves a better budget so we can start to do some other things? I know we've talked that could be CPA, it could be ARPA, it could be a variety of options, but have we generated a list of things that we should be considering in the next 2 years and how we could fund that? That's my curiosity is.
I think our intention, Norm, is to go through this process and have a project. I mean, in an ideal world, we'd circle back at town meeting next year with a partner and a conceptual project and some sense of what the town's piece of that would be. So absent that, I'm not sure, again, this is like the old children's story. If you give a mouse a cookie, I don't know what you do to this building. As soon as you touch it, it begs five other projects. So I think the goal here is to work this process through the summer, fall, and hopefully we have some meat around a concept then that we can start to put the budget together and what we would seek from potentially the CPC or ARPA or town meeting or general obligation bonds or, whatever the case may be. But I think we need to get a sense of where we're going if we're going to ask for money. Yeah.
Well, my concern is we don't have any money now left in the budget in case we get a big hiccup. And then my concern, so if something pops up and we need another 50 grand, we don't have it. So how do we put 50 grand in a bank somewhere so that we don't have to wait for town meeting or we don't have to wait? So that's my main concern is we're running out of money. If there's a hiccup, we don't have the funds.
Yeah, we have money for carrying costs, but yeah, if something drastic happens up there, then one option is potentially ARPA funds. Those would be funds that are available that wouldn't require town meeting action. That would probably be the primary source. But if it was something that was unforeseen and unavoidable, yeah.
So just like to have a checkbook available somewhere. That's all I had. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you. Next meeting.
So you gave a deadline of 2 weeks, which would be August 3rd, to get things into Brett. It probably would make sense, pop something the week of August 8th. Does that make sense, Brett? I'm away the week of August 1st and the week of August 22nd myself. I know it's going to get tough to get everybody together, but.
I'm away until the 10th, but I am available the 11th and 12th.
Potentially something in the afternoon on the 11th. We've got negotiations on our end in the morning. Would 2 o'clock on August 11th work for people?
Yes.
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 Really?
I'll ask again.
That's shocking. Okay, so we've got August 11th at 2 p.m. and everybody will get their materials into Brett by August 3rd. And then Brett, if you just let us know how you'd want to structure the agenda at that point. Okay.
That's solved. Any other business?
Yeah, can I just, so the Board of Selectmen are taking requests for ARPA funds. We're making no promises, but we would like, a comprehensive list of what various boards and committees need and would request from that $4.5 million. So maybe at the next meeting, we could discuss whether we should ask for $50,000 as contingency funds, or personally, I would like to review the cost of removing those additions. If they're the biggest problem, and maybe Sean, you could go into this a little more at our next meeting. If you could say what project you would attack first, if it's the additions or restoring the chimney or whatever you think, we could talk about it and then as a committee request the money from ARPA if we decide to do that. It's just a suggestion for a topic for a next agenda.
Yeah, we did have estimates for the removal of the additions when the DBVW recommended that. So they're not current, but we do have a sense of what the order of magnitude of that would be. So we can put that together.
Any other business? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn today's White Cliffs Committee meeting.
Second,
Any discussion? Thankfully none. All right, roll call. Norm,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Julianne,
aye.
Diana,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Thank you,